If you want to turn your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 3, 1 Kings chapter 3, I noticed a theme, a story throughout several places in the Bible that pops up in even a lot of our fictional stories. Some of our fictions that are the most affecting, if you're like me in this, are the ones where maybe the hero of the story, the hero or the heroine, has to make a dire decision to leave or to lose or to fail on purpose in one area so that their total mission can succeed. Some recent ones, for instance, when the kids were a little bit younger, in California they require for some certain grades for California history that you read this book called By the Great Horn Spoon. And the idea, that was like an explanation, I guess, that many prospectors would make as they were coming over in the 1840s to mine for gold. And the point of the story was just kind of to tell you how California worked during the gold rush as you follow these two characters through their own part in the gold rush. And the story concludes when the ship that they're on going down the Sacramento River back to San Francisco to cash in all this gold that they'd found, the ship sinks. And so to survive, they have to get rid of all their gold to be able to make it back alive. And I remember reading that to the kids and having that feeling in me like, oh man, like everything that we were doing up till now is gone. It's sunk to the bottom of the river. But you realize at the end of the book, no, that was the right thing to do. That it's okay to have thrown that all away so that you can win in the end, in essence. There's another story here. Recently, I heard that many of you had seen the movie Hail Mary. And the main character of that story has to give up all hope of reaching Earth. He's an astronaut. Give up all hope of reaching Earth. Why? So that he can save the Earth. And there's a strange irony in that, a little backwards thing about how you have to lose to win. And I won't spoil the rest of that story for you. But this story comes to us in our fiction, I believe, because it's so frequently found in the scriptures and it is terribly affecting. In each one of the stories that we're going to talk about today, we'll talk about 4. Each one of them, you see the same essence repeat itself, that you have to lose to truly win. And in a way, there is a divine irony in all of this. I believe divinely inspired, divinely designed, that things have to work a little backwards from how the rest of the world tells us that they should work, and that you should win, no matter what sort of costs to other people. Or is it more important to have everything be a cost to us or a loss to us so that we can have a great victory in Christ? In 1 Kings chapter 3 and verses 16 all the way through verse 28, I have a typo there, you're going to see a case of this woman who realizes in probably some of the most intimate ways possible that she has to lose to be able to have a success in her story. And this is the harlot that comes to King Solomon in one of his first and really his greatest court case that we know about. For the context here, as we get ready to read verse 16, young King Solomon, relatively young, has just in the verses prior to this gone to ask God for wisdom. And God has given it to him divinely. And so also God says, because you didn't ask for riches or for power, all these other things, I will give you those things because you asked for wisdom and you ignored those other things. I'll give you it all, God says. And so in some sort of way of thinking, even just for Solomon a few verses prior, Solomon had to ask for something that seemed small, that seemed less important to a worldly perspective, and he gained it all through that. We see this also pop up here with the case of the 2 harlots. In verse 16, it says, the 2 women who were harlots came to the king and stood before him. The one woman said, "Oh, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I give birth to a child while she was in the house. It happened on the 3rd day after I gave birth that this woman also gave birth to a child, and we were together. There was no stranger in the house with us, only the 2 of us in the house. The woman's son died in the night because she lay on it. So she arose in the middle of the night and took my son from beside me while your maidservant slept, and laid her in her bosom, and laid her dead son in my bosom. And when I arose in the morning to nurse my son, behold, he was dead. But when I looked at him carefully in the morning, behold, he was not my son whom I had borne. Then the other woman said, no, for the living one is my son, and the dead one's your son. But the first woman said, no, for the dead one is your son, and the living one is my son. You can hear how it's just devolving into, no, he's mine, no, he's mine. And so thus it says they spoke before the king. Then the king said, the one says, this is my son who is living, and your son is the dead one. The other says, no, for your son is the dead one, and my son is the living one. Now, if you stop there for just a minute, I think you can fully understand. If you've never read this passage before, it makes it a little easier. If you have read this before, try to be in Solomon's place where this is all he has to go off of. I can think about the situation that they're in either by force or by choice. It's a terrible place to be. It's one of the worst possible things to be involved in the world's oldest profession. We give it the euphemism of prostitution. And I almost wonder if there's something to this, not just in having a son, but in having a future, maybe having a possible escape from this situation, that there's a lot at stake. And you might say things like, well, why are they prostitutes to begin with? Why are there any in the kingdom to begin with? Well, crime continues to exist, even in a kingdom that's doing all of God's will. And since there's no witnesses to what's happened in their circumstance, the judgment isn't about whether or not they should be killed at this moment. The judgment is about, well, whose kid is this? And likewise, Solomon has no witnesses to act on this. He's just got hearsay. So he does something incredible, we believe, by divinely inspired wisdom. Verse 24. Since the king says, well, you're each saying the same thing, the king says, give me a sword. So they brought a sword before the king. The king said, divide the living child in two and give half to the one and half to the other. I don't think that Solomon is being so callous as to be like, well, just, whatever. Now you get half. Now it's fair. Sure, that works. I believe he is acting in divine wisdom. And so, it says in verse 26, the woman whose child was the living one spoke to the king. For she was deeply stirred over her son and said, oh, my Lord, give me the living child. Give her rather the living child, and by no means kill him. But the other said, he shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide him. Sure. Then the king said, give the first woman the living child, and by no means kill him. She is his mother. And when all Israel heard the judgment which the king had handed down, they feared the king, for they saw that wisdom of God was in him to administer justice. That's the main point of what's going on here. We're getting validation for Solomon being God's divinely appointed king. But in this story, we see this woman who makes such a terrible decision in the whole hopes that she might save her child, even if it means that she does not get to have him. And so she decides to give him up. And in the long run, she did not know that this was going to happen. There's no way to know. In the long run, she does get her child returned to her. But who knows whether that was going to happen? And regularly throughout the Old Testament especially, you see a lot of people act on faith based on what God told them through a prophet or through the scriptures, not knowing how it was going to work out. Only that God said, here's how it will, and they trusted him. And so here she acts in a very special way. In fact, if you're reading out of a New King James Bible, I'd like you to look at verse 26. You can see it in a version of it in every one of the translations. But in verse 26, it tells us that because it says here that she was moved by compassion. But the New American Standard, which is I'm reading out of today, says that she was deeply stirred over her son. The language is interesting here. It says that her liver burned or her bowels burned, which doesn't sound terribly inviting or affectionate, but it's the same way that you and I would say today, our heart. She had heartache for him. Her heart burned for him is the idea. And so some translations have decided to take that figure of speech and make it make a little more sense to us. She has great compassion for him. Her heart ached for him. And so because of that, then, she decided to give him up. And we know and have heard stories that has happened and that child might have been saved even if it wasn't housed with that mother. And so she eventually got all this to come back to her in the best possible case that could have worked out. See, to lose her son was better than to lose her son. And then she gained it all. I want you to remember this point as we continue on, that she was motivated this way out of love, out of compassion. We might even say pity in the most high-minded sense, that she was doing all this for her son at great cost to herself. Let's look at another example. We're going to go earlier in time. So here we've got Solomon in his palace. Let's go a bit earlier to the tabernacle, before the temple was built, and to see the case of a woman by the name of Hannah. And as she is living in the time of the judges, it is very much as the book of Judges might describe it. I'm of course paraphrasing an idea. It's the Wild West here. And things are crazy, and people are doing all sorts of awful and terrible things to themselves and to each other. And anytime you see any sort of glimpse of something that's true or good or loving out of this time period, it is worth noting especially. And here you have a case of a woman named Hannah. And in verse 1 of 1 Samuel chapter 1, it says that there was a certain man from Ramathaim Zophim, from the hill country of Ephraim. And his name was Elkanah, the son of Jehoram, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. He had 2 wives. And this is already letting you know at the beginning that things are messed up here. The Israelites have been told, don't multiply wives for yourselves, but here we are. And so he has 2 wives, and the name of one was Hannah, or Hannah as we would say, and the name of the other was Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now this man would go up from his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice to Yahweh of hosts in Shiloh. And the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, that's not the same Phinehas we talked about recently, were priests to Yahweh there. When the day came that Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and her daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah. He had compassion towards Hannah. But Yahweh had closed her womb. Her rival, however, would provoke her bitterly to irritate her because Yahweh had closed her womb. Like the prostitutes earlier, or I guess I should say later in time with Solomon, Hannah is also in a very difficult and frustrating circumstance. So much so that it's a little harder for us to grasp in a modern case, where we're often told things about, like, put off having children till later as much as you can, when here at this time we understood the role of children in a household and that it was a blessing from God. And so in the mindset of the culture at the time, to not have children meant that God was opposed to you. And the text does indeed tell us that God had closed her womb for whatever reasons that he had. Now, as Elkanah loves her and he's trying to take care of her, the law talks about what to do with, if you do happen to marry multiple wives, you shouldn't have done, but you can't just divorce the one or the other because you love one better than the other. You're in it now, and so you must take care of them now. And he is doing his duty to both of his wives as much of a messed up situation as this is. And so he loves Hannah, and he is trying to help her. But all the while, she's begging God for a son. Let's go to the next few verses. In verse 7, it happened year after year, as often as she went up to the house of Yahweh, she would provoke her. This is the other wife. And so she wept and would not eat. You can imagine why she would provoke her. It sounds like maybe she is the unloved spouse, Peninnah is, and so anything you can do through jealousy to get back at the other one, you'll take advantage of. And I got kids and you don't, you know, sort of things like that. And every time they'd go up, she would mock her. And so she wept and would not eat. And then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? He's trying, but he doesn't quite get exactly what this means to her. Sometimes I'll joke with Paige when maybe something doesn't work out exactly like she hopes, very small things maybe, and I might say, am I not better to you than 10 sons? And understanding that that's not what she wants to hear. That's not helpful. And so in verse 9 says that Hannah rose after eating and drinking in Shiloh, that now Eli the priest was sitting at the seat of the doorpost of the temple of Yahweh, the tabernacle here. She was greatly distressed, praying to Yahweh, and wept bitterly. You could just see the scene here. You've been in places where you might have seen somebody, and maybe you expect that this episode here, this weeping is coming, or maybe it just kind of bubbles to the top, and somebody you're talking with, you didn't know what was going on with their life, and so here she is outside of the gate. This woman is just in abject destitution. And as she's weeping before God. It says here that in verse 11, she made a vow in this weeping, O Yahweh of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a son, and then I will give him to Yahweh all the days of his life, and a razor shall never come on his head. She begged God for a son. And in the intervening verses here, Eli comes out and he says, hey, looks like you've been having way too much wine to drink. Quit it. And she says, I'm not. I'm praying before God. I'm begging him for some sort of recourse. But you'll notice the promise that she makes, this vow that she makes, that if God would give her a son, she would give him away. What sort of sense does that make? As you look through the text a little bit further on, I'd like you to ask the question, what does she gain from this? Look at verse 28 again. In fact, actually, no, let's go back up to verse 11 here. Look at the promise in particular. I will give him to Yahweh all the days of his life, and a razor shall never come upon his head. It's not just that she's giving him away, or that's the plan if God would answer her prayer in the affirmative, but she's also pledging him to an even deeper vow of what sounds like Nazirite service. There's going to be a lot of other things that come along with the role of the person who does not shave their hair specifically for God's service. This guy, whoever he is, if God does grant this son, is going to have a very difficult life as well. But what do you gain from something like this? Go to chapter 2 here. In fact, let me turn over in this passage as well. 1 Samuel chapter 2, and go down to verse 21. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 21. The good news here is that she does indeed have a son. It says that Yahweh visited Hannah. Earlier in the text it says that he remembered her like she'd prayed for. And so he visited Hannah, and she conceived and gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the boy Samuel grew before the Lord. And so I'm skipping ahead here. But Samuel is granted to her as a son. Samuel is a pivotal person. We've got a whole couple of books named after him. He's a pivotal person in God's service, but what does she gain from this? Does she gain the possibility now that as her womb is open, she gets to have more kids, as the verse says? She has no idea if that's going to happen or not. So we can't say that Hannah begs God for a son so that she'll have then more kids after them that she can keep as a replacement for Samuel. No, that's not how she's thinking. Go to verse 28 here in chapter 1, verse 28. As he is born, she comes and fulfills her vow. And it says here that, so I have dedicated him to Yahweh as long as he lives. And he is dedicated to Yahweh, and he worshiped Yahweh there. Samuel lives here for the rest of his life. And whether or not he knows who his actual mom is kind of beside the point as well. He's not going to be hers. And so we can't say something like, he's dedicated to God, but he gets to live at home with me. And, it's just kind of a mental thing. It's just a paperwork thing in the filing cabinet that he's gone. He's not belong to you anymore. And at best, they're going to get to see him once a year when they come up to offer sacrifices. And again, whether or not he knows her is a totally different point. So what does she gain from this? A son that she gives away, maybe future children that she has no idea is going to happen or not. Go to verse 24. I was like, let's get into a cynical headspace here for a second and be kind of unfair to her. What if she's doing this because she just wants the privilege of that from like a societal standpoint, people to just be like, oh, okay, she's not the worst person ever. God isn't her enemy. And then also get out of the redemption price. At this time, if you were living under the law of Moses and you had a firstborn, especially a firstborn son, there's going to be a high valuation that's assigned to him that you will have to go and take up to the tabernacle and pay that as a way of imagining almost that this child is naturally and will always be God's, but you're buying him back as the privilege for him to be yours at your home. And that would be expensive. You're full and some. So I was thinking, if I'm being cynical here for a second, let's say that maybe she just wanted this for all the popularity and none of the cost. But go to chapter 1, verse 24. It says, when she had weaned him, as she promised, she took him up with her with a 3-year-old bull and 1 ephah of flour and a jug of wine and brought them to the house of Yahweh in Shiloh, although the child was young. She didn't get out of that. You might even say that she didn't have to pay that because she dedicated him to God. She did not redeem him back for herself, but she paid it anyway. And so she went at great cost to this. Let's go to chapter 2 and verse 1. You might say, well, maybe she could have some bragging rights here again, like we'd mentioned. But look at how she thinks about these things. How, if we can compare her to the prostitute, as we read earlier, how her heart burned within her, not only for her son that she might get to have, but also for her God. And in chapter 2, verse 1, Hannah prayed and said, "My heart exults in Yahweh. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth speaks boldly against my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation." She does have something to say now in that God has favored her. But she says her whole reason for doing this is for the great glory that is God. You can keep reading through this song that she writes. Let's go to verse 2. "There is no one holy like you, Yahweh. Indeed, there is no one besides you, nor is there any rock like our God. Boast no more so proudly. Let no arrogance come out of your mouth, for Yahweh is a God of knowledge, and with him actions are weighed." Does that sound like somebody who's going to turn around and go, "See, God loves me, he gave me a kid"? Let no one boast. God is great. Verse 4, "The bows of the mighty are shattered, the feeble gird on strength. Those who are full hire themselves out for bread, and those who are hungry cease to hunger. Even the barren gives birth to 7, but she who has many children languishes. Yahweh kills and makes alive. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. Yahweh makes poor and rich. He brings low. He also exalts. He raises the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with nobles and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are Yahweh's, and he has set the world on them. He keeps his feet from his godly ones, but the wicked ones are silenced in darkness. For not by might shall a man prevail. Those who contend with Yahweh will be shattered. Against them he will thunder in the heavens. Yahweh will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and will exalt the horn of his anointed one." His Messiah is the word there. And what's funny about this passage, just as a quick side note, is that this is almost, not exactly word for word, but certainly thought for thought, with a song that Mary sings in the Gospels. And how in Hannah's dedication to God, she gives away her only begotten son at the time, and then also gives away so much more. What did she gain from this? I think it was, if we could say it this way, the partnership with God itself. That to be able to have this opportunity with and from and through and for God was all that she had ever hoped for. And that God had not forgotten her or had abandoned her, but they are working together now. And in such a way have brought a son into the world too. So I don't want to say it like she gained the transaction, because that's kind of a dirty word where we'd say this is transactional, but she did gain a partnership with God through this. She loved Samuel even before he was born. She loves God even more so. And so unlike the prostitute, she never does get her son back. He lives at the tabernacle for the rest of his days, serving as a judge of Israel, and even goes on to appoint the first and second kings over Israel. Her prayer, I think, is an evidence that she is thinking about things correctly in very much the same way that Abraham does. Let's talk about Abraham here, this third of our stories. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 15. We're going to spend most of our time in chapter 22, but for setting up the scene, let's go to Genesis 15 and verse 1. God has proved his approval for Hannah in the giving of a son. He's also done so with Abraham. You all know that Abraham has for many years, almost 100 years, been without a son, even though God has promised him numerous descendants on multiple occasions. One of these is here in chapter 15, starting in verse 1. "After these things, the word of Yahweh came to Abram in a vision, saying, 'Do not fear, Abram. I am a shield to you. Your reward shall be very great.'" Now, I'm not going to accuse God of being unhelpful here, but what I think is happening is there's a very close tie with what Elkanah says is, "Am I not better to you than 10 sons? Don't we have something special?" God comes to him and he says, "I'm your shield. I'm your great reward." But look at how Abram responds. Abram says, "Oh, Lord Yahweh, what will you give me? Since I'm childless and the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus." He kind of voices his frustration. "Oh, if you're my reward, I don't got any kids over here. I think you could reward me very nicely with this." And Abram said, "Since you've given no offspring to me, one born in my house is my heir, just a servant. He's got no blood ties to me." Then behold, the word of Yahweh came to him, saying, "This man shall not be your heir, but one who will come forth from your own body, he shall be your heir." And he took him outside and said, "Now look to the heavens. Count the stars, if you're able to count them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. And then Abram, this is Abram here, then he believed in Yahweh, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. For any sort of disagreement or disgruntlement Abram might have had, that changes right away when God says, I'll give you sons. And Abraham believes immediately, trusts God immediately. But go down to chapter 22, or ahead to chapter 22, and start in verse 1. And I believe that many of you would also be familiar with this passage. It says, now it came about after these things, after a few years here. Again, I think we've talked about this fairly recently, and so I won't get into all the little points. But it seems that Isaac, this new and promised son, is probably in his late teens, maybe early 20s. They've been living life and enjoying the promise that God has given them through this son. And a voice comes to him. It's God testing Abraham, it says in verse 1. And he said to him, Abram. And he said, here I am. And he said, take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. And so Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac, his son, and he split wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him early in the morning. There's no waiting. It's not like 3 weeks later. He went as soon as he was able. I find it interesting that in the first few lines there in verse 2, God tells him, take your son. He's only got one. Your only son. I've only got one. The son that you love. I only got one. Isaac. I only got one. I think there's a reason that God's telling him those things, to show him that this is no small thing that he asks of him. Let's go a little further on to verse 16. Verses 16 through 18, as he gets ready to offer the sacrifice, he has stopped from that. Verse 16, it says, by myself I have sworn, declares Yahweh, because you have done this thing. And he, of course, as you read the text, he did not kill his son. But God says, because you did it, you were there, you were committed to this. If I had not stopped you, you would have done this. He says, you have not withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you. And I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. And in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. That's you, by the way, too, in verse 18. You're a part of all the nations. You notice how in Hannah's song she's looking forward to the Messiah, through the giving up of her only son. And here Abraham is told by God, through the giving up of your only son, all the nations will be blessed by him that comes from you, your seed, he says, singular. And so as Abraham observes this event, we could even go back a few verses to verse 13 and 14, that when the angel of the Lord does stop Abraham, that there's a replacement that's offered for Isaac as this offering. It says that Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the place of his son. Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide, or Yahweh Yireh. As it is said to this day, in the mountain of Yahweh it will be provided. Whether or not Abraham knows it, he has issued a prophecy here. The idea is, hey, let's just call this mountain the place where God gives, because he gave a ram. But this mountain, Mount Moriah, would eventually get its name changed throughout Israel's history to Mount Zion, and eventually there would be a large city built there in Jerusalem, outside of which God did provide a replacement, an only begotten son, whom he loved very dearly and had to give up. When I read this passage, and I read either verse 16 or I read verse 2, I cannot help but hear God's own heart burning for his son. That he's asking Abraham to do something that he has already known he has done in the future in giving his only begotten son. Again, just as a reminder or a recap, God promised Abraham a son only to take him away, but then to give him back. And you can hear, I think, as well, God's own heart burning for him as Abraham recognizes that eventually, and especially in the greatest possible way, God will provide a replacement here on this mountain to save all the nations. Which brings us to our last point. Let's turn over to Hebrews chapter 2. Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 9. God has not asked us of these people, or shut Hannah's womb, I believe, for the purpose that she would beg him for a son, or to give Abraham a son for the purpose to tell him to give him away, or for the prostitutes for us to recognize that to have him back truly, to have him be saved, you must deliver him over to save him from death. In all of these cases, God is showing us a pattern through history that he is going to do this thing perfectly, and then like Abraham or the harlot or Hannah is going to ask you to do the same thing as well. In Hebrews chapter 2, we should also ask, what does God gain in giving up his own son? He gains many sons. And he alone knew that this was going to be the way it was going to work. You can, of course, as we get to read here in Hebrews chapter 2, before we read that, you all remember John 3:16. For God so loved the world. God was so moved with compassion to the world, like those that we've read earlier, that he gave his only begotten son, the son of whom he describes earlier in the Gospels, that is beloved, is well-pleasing to him, is a great son. And he gave him away, and for what? To gain us in return. In Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 9, the author here tells us that we do now see him, who was made a little lower than the angels, namely Jesus, because of the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. God would lose him for everyone. And yet, in verse 10, for it was fitting for him, for whom are all things, and through whom are all things, in bringing many sons to glory, to perfect the author of their salvation through sufferings. For both he sanctifies and those who are sanctified are all one from the Father, for which reason he is not ashamed to call them brethren, saying, I will proclaim your name to my brethren. In the midst of the congregation I will sing your praise. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children whom God has given me. Here, the author is quoting these Old Testament passages in relation to the Messiah, showing us that the Messiah is the offered son, is the son that was sent to be lost in death, but was gained back so that other sons could be added to God's family. So that it says there in that last line, verse 13, I, Jesus, and the children whom God has given me. He gained that by being willing to go to death, like all these other sons we've seen up to this point in the lesson. Now let's turn over to Matthew chapter 16 and verses 24 through 27. God asks things of people that he is willing to do himself, and has in many cases done so better than anybody he's ever asked to do this. And so now on the other end of this point in history of Jesus' crucifixion, he asks everyone who would come to follow him to lose everything so that they can win as well. In Matthew chapter 16 and verse 24, Jesus says to his disciples, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. Think of the prostitute back in 1 Kings. If she had wanted to keep her son, he would be killed. But she was willing to deny him so that he could be saved. We're getting even more close to home here than children. You must lose your life to win it. He says as he continues, whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And that is, of course, a tremendous irony. In verse 26, for what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in the glory of his Father with his angels and will repay every man according to his deeds. And that point is, if we've wanted to keep if we've wanted to win, if we've wanted to avoid all sort of loss or cost for the cause of Christ, God will answer in kind in the way that he has always designed this irony. The first or last. Those who try to win, lose. Those who try to stay alive and live to the fullest experience no life in eternity. Eternal death separated from God. Go a few chapters later to chapter 19 and verse 27. Matthew 19, verse 27, Peter has been hearing Jesus say this again and again. Read all the Gospels and Jesus mentions this. The authors mention Jesus says this multiple times in all the Gospels. And so Peter now here towards the end of their time on earth together decides he's going to ask Jesus what all this means. And so in verse 27, Peter said to him, well, behold, we left everything and followed you. So what will there be for us? And Jesus says to him, truly I say to you, that you who have followed me in the regeneration where the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne, you will also sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. You will get a lot because you gave up so much. Now, whether or not Peter's thinking about this in the best way is a different point. But notice that Jesus says that that's in the time of regeneration, of like a rebuilding. You think of like rebirth as the idea as well, which means what has to have happened before that? You have had to have died first. And so Jesus says in the resurrection, in the regeneration, when this is all remade, you will have much because you gave away everything now. Let's go to the next few lines here. Verse 29, even though I'm not one of those and you are not one of those who will sit on the 12 thrones, he does say in verse 29 that everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or children or farms for my name's sake will receive many times as much and will inherit eternal life. Now, God has not ever asked of every person that to be able to become a Christian, you must literally get rid of every single thing around you. But he regularly shows us that if that thing is going to come between you and God, you must be willing to give it away so that you can have any hope. And so for those of you, everyone in this room, I believe has, to become a Christian, given away something. If we've held on to everything and think that we entered into the kingdom whole the same way that we are, we're not going to gain anything. There's nothing to be had here unless we have denied ourselves, unless we've considered ourselves given away for whatever God would will. Again, he says in verse 29, everyone who's left anything. Did you leave a house? Did you maybe downsize, move to an area you didn't want to be because you wanted to serve Christ better? Because you wanted to do things for him better, for his name's sake. Did you give up a brother or a sister? Did your relationship become strained, estranged? Do you not talk to each other anymore because of that decision that you made to serve the Christ? Did you give up a father or a mother? Did you count a child as dead to you? Did you give up a farm? Did you give up possessions? What did you give up for him? Jesus says, if you have done so, if you have counted that as a loss, you will gain more. And he does say, not just in this life. In fact, over in another gospel, he'll say, not just in this generation. And I do believe that for all of us who have given up some form of a relationship with a loved one for the cause of Christ, well, you know what I did gain in that? I gained you. And so Jesus' promise is fulfilled in a small way now compared to what he says here in eternal life later. And look at verse 30. The many who are first, if you want to be first, if you want to have it all, if you want to keep it now, if you want to experience no risk or loss, you will be last. And it will all be gone beforehand. But the many who are first will be last, and the last first. What Jesus is telling us, as he says in this passage, is that my life is forfeit. It's not mine anymore. I cannot consider it as mine anymore. And what's the point? To give up my life? To gain the life? Yeah, better life. What's the point in putting myself last? so that God can make you first. Like Hannah says, so that I may exult in my Lord because he has raised me, the poor, up to become rich. What's the point in showing that kind of love? In getting God's love in return. What's the point in trusting in his commands? To live a way that not only pleases him, but is of great benefit to me now and forever. What's the point in performing this kind of irony like this? To lose everything, to gain everything, and to be in partnership with God. That's the point. The greatest thing in life is not life itself. It's not the blessings that we do get to have, that we've got to be willing to give away at a moment's notice should it be required. It's not the family members that we might gain or lose as time goes on. It is to please and to be in partnership with God for now and eternity. But as we finish this lesson, I want to recap each one of the people we discussed today, to bring that into our life so that we could make those kinds of decisions, those high-stakes decisions, in a way that is actually useful. The harlot we had seen at the beginning loved her son, had great compassion for him. And if we, in a cynical sort of way, are thinking, well, if we're going to game the system, if I take the last seat, then I get to be in the first spot. And we're just thinking about it just that way, that is not out of love. It's not out of compassion. To do these things because we love God is the right motivation. You also see that Hannah gave everything. She still had a home to live in. She still had a spouse that loved her very much, I believe. But she gave away the whole thing that mattered in life up to that point. She gave him away to serve God. And she, of all these, did not get him back. But she is blessed. Abraham trusted God, we were told, and it was accounted to him as righteousness. And if we can stir all those together and make them into one thing, to give up our lives out of compassion, out of love for God, to give up everything in them to his purposes and his will, because we trust him in whatever he wants to do with it, whether or not I experience a life of pain from here on out, or a life of some sort of privilege that he might give me. These are the right reasons to lose so that we can truly win. That's what this divine irony teaches us, to give up a life so that he can give it back to us the right way. And so if you are not a Christian this morning, and you've not given up your life in obedience to the gospel, if you've not pledged yourself to him in trust, in fealty, then you've got an opportunity now. Or if you have questions about it, please ask us. It is a difficult thing. It's no easy thing to respond to the gospel. But you will be rewarded by God himself for all eternity. And if you'd like to do so, please let us know as we stand and sing this song together.